Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and our guests today are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here.
As always. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Meet you.
Bingo.
Hello.
Done it. Ivan, first question to you. Do you have a video that you would like to show us?
No, unfortunately, no videos for today. I'm in a hurry and connecting via my phone, so I won't be able to share it.
We can see that. Okay, so I was doing a lot of thinking in the last few days.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, something along the line of what we discussed on our last show. You were not here, Ivan, so we had discussion with Dr. Lockwood, and I sort of wanted to reflect a little bit more of where we are going, and so on. So it is for several months now, at least, we were discussing the desire, possibility for Ukrainians to kick off all Russian troops from its territory and liberate it all. Okay. Now, that, even if it's achievable, it still doesn't bring the peace, because Russia can continue bombardments of Ukrainian cities even from their own territory, from Caspian Sea equatory, and so on. Now that we learned that Russians, they mined 200,000 square kilometers with mines, making not just any Ukrainian attacks, but even survival and just living conditions in Ukraine, or at least that part of Ukraine that was occupied, next to impossible. Now there are a lot of meetings in Europe, and there are a lot of talks about possible admission of Ukraine to European Union or NATO, or both. As we know, that's happening. Speaking about NATO, the situation is very simple. If Ukrainian army would have to join NATO, it would happen yesterday. There is no impediment of Ukrainian army to be a part of NATO. However, it's not army that becomes a member of NATO, it's a country with its leadership, with all the problems, some hidden problems, and so on. Now, these problems are no longer really hidden. They've been discussed on a very high level in the Western United States, including President Joe Biden, who's done so much for Ukraine and its defense. Speaking about the front situation, the front situation is this. We know the Western or American doctrine, how the attack has to develop. It's first aviation, artillery, missiles. Once all that done, then tanks and all the rest are coming through. In Ukrainian situation, for example, all the doctrine is now being disregarded. Ukrainians are being said, you go ahead. Okay, there are mines, you have no aviation, but you go ahead and show us what you can do, and then we will give you aviation and some other missiles that are available, or so on. It's in my opinion, a very strange position. It almost reminds me the old funny story when people are jumping to the swimming pool and there is no water. They're breaking their heads, their arms, legs, or somebody asks, what are you doing? What's happening here? He said, well, we were told once we will learn how to jump, they will put in the water. There are some other points of view that aviation, for example, is not being given because the pilots, the Russians have a superior air missile defenses. So the pilots flying the F-16s, they will not be able even to do any damage to Russia. All they will do be preoccupied how to save their planes and their lives as well. So that's something else. Even Ukrainians who will learn eventually how to fly the F-16s, it requires 2-3 more years to become a real pros. And before that, they will have to preoccupy how to make sure that Russians will not destroy their machines, whether it's new machines or not. Now, I'm not obviously expert in military problems. However, right now, when you look at all this, you have to now divide and have several separate points which are all connected. Nevertheless, they are separate. Number one, Ukrainian army, its successes, and up-to-date information, what's happening ground on the front line. That's question number one. Number two, I would say the real situation in the front and whether we would like to take a look one more time at the Korean situation, where after so much fighting, if I remember correctly, about 35,000 Americans were killed there, million Chinese, probably 4 million Koreans, if that's correct. I'm not so sure. And eventually there were agreement to stop fighting, and it's staying there for 70 years. As a result, they became very prosperous, South Korea, and backward, and one of the poorest countries in the world, North Korea. So if imagine that such situation would happen between Russia and Ukraine, you can see, and I don't think you would have to wait 70 years, but I think in 7 years, you will see very prosperous Ukraine, especially with the help of Western nations and United States, and backward Russia, which will be coming really in horrible hole with the sanctions against it and so on. So there are several variations on that theme. We all know that each war eventually ends, and it ends with a peace of some kind. So with happening all of that, what is the best possible scenario under the circumstances? Again, what happened is that what right now happening on the front lines, it's a huge obstacles of Russian mines, 200 square kilometers. And sometimes, okay, you have a certain goal to achieve, and you do everything possible and impossible to get there. But if you see the obstacles after obstacles, some of them you can go still through, some of them are very hard to overcome, or so on. You still continue marching ahead, or you are trying to implement Plan B, maybe, or some other venues. Ivan, tell me what do you think of all that? And you are welcome to disagree with me as much as you want.
Yeah. Thank you, Sasha, for such numerous thoughts about the possible end of this war. Obviously, for Ukraine, the one only right scenario is the complete military defeat of Russia on the battlefield, which will cause the internal processes in Russia and hopefully change of the Russian government, including Vladimir Putin and his fellows. And this
very, very quick remark. And this is not only Ukraine's best scenario, but also the West, the United States, and all world. I totally 100%.
It's the best scenario at all, and hopefully this scenario will work. But Ukrainian counteraffairs is going really slow and really tough because from one side, because of the really numerous minefields and completely burned land which Russia turns occupied Ukrainian territories. From the other side, Ukrainian command is not choosing the tactics of Russian side and not throwing all available troops and all available resources in.
Oh, there is some. Okay, you're back.
I'm back. So hopefully this situation on the battlefield will change in the near future when Ukrainian reconnaissance and force, like Jonathan is calling it, will find the weak positions of Russian troops and possibility to put a greater number of forces into this breach and then advance really quickly. But this situation may not come until the end of the summer, and Ukrainian command will not just take all our troops into the battlefield, into the meat grinder on the minefields, because we will face really high losses, which despite the Russian side, they don't consider any losses. Their society don't consider the numerous losses, but Ukrainian society will not so easily accept high casualties on the battlefield, and this is another problem. So the situation really really difficult for both parties, and of course it will be much easier if Ukraine had modern fighting jets like F-16. And I disagree with you, Sasha, that it will take several years for Ukrainian pilots to learn how to fly really efficiently on them.
Sorry, Ivan, what I meant is that, and it's not my idea, I read it elsewhere, that, okay, it can take 3 to 4 months for Ukrainian experienced pilots to be trained on F-16s. However, it's taking 2-3 years, or what might be, to become a real pro in that respect, when you can not just getting up and down, but you can actually use this F-16s to 100% of its potential, and that would take some time. However, listen, everything is possible.
From other side, we may ask not. We will may not wait for Ukrainian pilots to learn how to fly F-16, but we may ask experienced American and European pilots who already know how to
and who already retired
F-16, like veterans, to join Ukrainian army, to join our foreign legion, and we already have a lot of volunteers.
The legal framework exists to be
from all over the world, and as far as I know, our Ministry of Defense already asked, and this message was broadcasted, that we're waiting for experienced F-16 fighters to join Ukrainian army on the volunteer basis and to help us defeat Russian troops on the battlefield. So no one knows how the situation will go on, but the really one thing we know is when Ukraine is advancing on the battlefield, Russia is breaking the bridge and doing even worse and worse things. When Ukraine started counteroffense on the Kherson region, Russia blew the Kakhovka dam.
Yes.
Now they've mined the Zaporizhia nuclear station, and Ukrainian intelligence is really discussing this problem. And as far as I know, today is the United Nations Security Council when this question also will be discussed, and there is a real possibility that Russia can blow the Zaporizhia nuclear station in order not to allow Ukrainian forces to advance on that direction. And now Ukrainian forces are advancing, and Russia will either have to leave the Zaporizhia nuclear station or they will blow it. And as far as we know from Chernobyl, for instance, that that Soviet Union, that Russia, they are not really afraid of using the nuclear or experimenting with the nuclear reactors and so on. They have no responsibility at all for keeping the fresh air, unpolluted earth, and they don't consider any casualties
Unfortunately.
amongst the civilian population and amongst the army. If you haven't seen the Chernobyl series on HBO, it's really a good time to see it. It's in order to understand how Soviet Union behaves with the nuclear power, and we have such risk now with Russia when they mined the Zaporizhia nuclear plant.
Yeah, agree, Ivan. Jonathan, I would like to
I
allow
mean,
you to
I'm just
allow
sitting here
your
watching the exchange. That's okay.
no, but
You learn more
I
by
think
listening than you do by
it's
talking.
fair if we will not allow you to speak your mind.
No,
We discussed lately how important it is for Ukraine to learn to defend itself against Russia, not just during the war, but during the peacetime. And this is of paramount importance, not to rely on NATO or somebody else. It's Ukraine has to have a very strong military force. It has to produce the best possible ammunition, weapons, and it may have some agreement with the United States, maybe UK, maybe Poland, here and there, but I think NATO right now quite distant. So in this respect, Jonathan, what do you think is importance of keeping this newly built Ukrainian army, as many brigades as they assemble? Some people believe that it's much more than 12 brigades. They believe that there are well over 20 brigades, but it doesn't matter. There are these modern brigades right now. How important, Jonathan, for you, in your opinion, is to keep the brigades intact and start building up on it?
well, those newly equipped brigades are really Ukraine's most important strategic reserve because that they are keeping that held back in order to look for the best opportunity, the very best opportunity to throw a knockout blow, which could liberate large amounts of, such as the Crimea, from Russian control. I mean, that's one very big thing that those brigades could be committed to in the near future. And also, in any post-war settlement, those brigades and others reinforced, say, with engineer battalions and from the United States or from NATO to help to teach other Ukrainians how to rebuild and equip using the engineer battalions as a core force for repairing all the infrastructure damage. That's going to be very important in the post-war situation. Engineers are also very important for demining those large portions of Ukraine because engineers are very good at that. And so they would have the equipment and the expertise to go forth and clear out all those minefields once they've retaken those things. So those are all very important. But in a post-war settlement, Ukraine must be integrated into NATO's air defense, ballistic missile defense to provide a shield. It has to provide an integrated shield against any future Russian attacks. And I have to point out Putin's latest statement to Russian military graduates that they're going to be deploying within the next few weeks the Satan II hypersonic missiles with multiple nuclear warheads. This merely goes back to what I was saying 30 years ago, that the future of Russian strategy, that the Russians would continue to play to strength in the development of their military strategy. Their two areas of strength are nuclear forces and space, exploitation of space. In space, it would be simply what they're obviously doing is they're developing a counter space capability or capability for denying the use of space for effective exploitation by the U.S. and the West. But more specifically, they are relying ever more heavily on nuclear weapons and modernizing them and making sure. Now, it may be a tremendous bluff, because these nuclear forces may not be all that well maintained. We don't know that for sure. We have a suspicion, but those nuclear forces, again, they are very vulnerable to our current ballistic missile defenses. We have a demonstrated very effective capability in Patriot, greater than expected. And if you integrate that in a post-war situation with an upgraded U.S. Space Force that is equipped with a space fleet, a manned space fleet that is equipped with laser weapons capable of conducting boost phase missile defense. You integrate a space-based boost phase missile defense along with Patriot, and what you have is a system of interlocking shields, an interlocking shield ballistic missile defense system, which I have advocated for decades. And if the U.S. joins with its NATO allies in constructing such a global defense, you have the best possible deterrent, not only against future Russian aggression, but against aggression, for example, any other nuclear armed nation such as China, North Korea, even Iran, if they should manage to develop that. But you would have it would be effective on multiple fronts once you develop such a system. So that is the priority. We should be looking ahead to the reconstruction and strengthening of Ukraine's defenses, both military and economic, and reconstruction, because it is obvious that Russia is conducting a scorched earth policy, very similar to what they did in World War II. Second World War, they did scorched earth against the Germans as the Germans advanced. So you are seeing pretty much the same thing again. And so history repeats itself in that regard. So now we have to be very cognizant of this, and the Ukrainian military, for its part, has to do the best it can with what it has. You can't always fight with the weapons you want. You sometimes have to fight with what you have on hand and hope that you can rapidly take advantage of any new weapons that come your way. So this is why, rightfully so, the Ukrainian military and political leadership have been fairly cautious and in the use of their military forces and not committing all of their reserves until they find the proper moment and opportunity. In my opinion, just my opinion, that opportunity is going to become available in severing the last communications between Russia and Crimea. Sever that and isolate Crimea, and the Crimea. The isolated Russian forces will be quickly forced to surrender because they will have no opportunity to reinforce.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting opinion. Another one that I've heard lately is that whatever Ukrainians are doing against Russians, they have time until 29th of December. That's it. Why 29th of December? Because 29th of March, there will be presidential election in Ukraine. And uh, the General Zaluzhny lately became very, very popular, and as such, it could be a great alternative to Mr. Zelensky, who is there right now. And first of all, it's unclear even if Zelensky wants to be re-elected. I never heard about it, and nobody stated that. Number two, there is a big problem which I don't think will be resolved anytime soon with Mr. Yermak, which completely um, uh, he's overpowering figure of the Zelensky's administration, and it's all started with their first trip to when Zelensky just became president, and they met with Russian operatives, and they told Zelensky that, oh, Yermak is your man, appoint him as the head of administration, and so on. But now Yermak is such a figure that no business, small business, large business, anything can go around him. Everything is going through him, his cabinet. And when Biden offered a list of Ukrainian figures, politicians, who must go. He doesn't care if they will be sued or prosecuted or anything like this. They just simply must go. And there are 53 names. Name number one is Yermak. So it's all now comes down. It's coming from U.S. president, so you cannot second guess. Well, maybe they don't know all of it because I think that as much information as U.S. president have, no one in the world has anything even close to that. So we must at least mention that we cannot ignore it any longer, because if it's coming from U.S. president and millions of Americans heard that, and we will ignore it, I don't think it's the right policy. Um, Unless proven complete nonsense, which I don't believe anybody can do. So in this case, the election of Zelensky, if that's the case, may completely resolve all this issue with Yermak and many other issues. And Zelensky has, Zelensky has great authority over Western generals, and they all admire him. And maybe that's something what eventually happened. That's speculation. Nothing really been indicated. Um, it's very regrettable that to get Western weapons took such a long time, starting with javelins, then HIMARS, and so on. It was months of deliberations, of discussions, and so on. And that gave Russians time to mine 200,000 square kilometers, which will lead to, if still going ahead or so on, it will be just many more Ukrainian lives will be lost. So to avoid it, there will be a colossal time and efforts required to get rid of all these mines, which will considerably slow the Ukrainian advancement for, I don't know, for a certain period of time, weeks, maybe even months. Jonathan, what do you think about that?
I was just sitting here waiting for the grenade. Jonathan, what do you
Yeah,
think
yeah,
of that?
of course it's coming.
Give me. Yeah, let's play. Let's play toss the grenade. No, in any case, uh, well, I agree with you on that. This is the it is regrettable that the U.S. and the West took such a long period of time. But keep in mind, they weren't totally expecting the Russian offensive against Ukraine in the first place. So it is very difficult to go to decide when you have existing stuff. But they had some
They were expecting, Jonathan, they were expecting
the
that
West
Russia will
was
attack.
expecting.
Yeah, but they were not expecting that Ukraine will survive and that
Right,
Ukraine will fight.
right.
They didn't expect it.
Ukraine, that did take the West by surprise. The unexpected success of the Ukrainian defense and the unexpected ineptitude of the Russian attack, which in that you take those combinations, and all of a sudden now you've got a long war, and the West was not expecting a long war, a war of any great length, which that is what they were unprepared for, and they did not have. So they did not have a set plan in place to be able to continually supply. They had to draw from their existing stocks, and it reaches a certain point. Okay, then you have to go out to these defense companies and say, okay, looks like you're going to have to replace all your stocks, and they have to crank that into effect. So there was no preset plan of mobilization to enable them to rapidly replace or replenish. So yeah, you're both correct in that nobody expected a long war. Yeah, it was going to be decided, and they certainly did not expect. We were caught by surprise by the by Ukrainian success against Russian arms, and now the scenario which no one had predicted really was a long war, and now a potentially very successful Ukrainian counteroffensive with the prospect of actually gaining a military victory on the battlefield. And now the Ukrainians are asking, well, we need more weapons to seal this off. And here the West, various nations of the West say, oh, this is getting really difficult. Oh, well, they weren't expecting it. What else do you expect? They were caught unprepared for a long war. And nobody was banking on a long war. But it's certainly not Russia. And as I said, they've all been caught off guard. So now this new problem we have is how does Ukraine make the absolute most of what it has while it's waiting for those decisive weapons to finally get in there and have their effect on the battlefield. It's going. I make no bones about it. It's going to be difficult, and we have to put a certain amount of trust in the skill of the Ukrainian military and political leadership, because right now that's the big unknown. Will it be enough to overcome the current Russian resistance?
Absolutely.
And also, uh, Russia's, as I said, that Russia's threats, Putin's threats of deploying and using nuclear weapons in Ukraine, again, that's their one card that they have. Yeah, that is their only card. That has been their only card in their own perception for really since the beginning of the Cold War. Since about they first started doing this in 1957, when the Soviet Union first test fired its first intercontinental ballistic missile and demonstrated that it could reach the United States. And the Russians believed that this is what caused the United States to change its strategy in favor of from massive retaliation to flexible response. And as the Russian nuclear arsenal grew, they saw and believed that the U.S. was being forced to change its strategy in ways more accommodating to Russian military and foreign policy goals. And that has been ingrained in Russian thinking ever since. The more nuclear weapons we have, the more the West is forced to accommodate itself. And again, here in this Russian-Ukrainian war, what does Putin go to? He goes to a newer nuclear weapon system in hopes that this will have a decisive effect on cowing the West and intimidating the Ukrainians. Remember, their word for deterrence, ustrashenia, intimidation, nuclear intimidation forces. This tells you pretty much all you need to know. They are not deterrence forces in the sense that we understand it. It's containment. Sorry about that, my mispronunciation of that word. Shtervanya, to restrain or only in check. So in any case, we have a different understanding of deterrence forces than do the Russians. They see them as instruments of intimidation. So,
Jonathan,
go ahead.
as I've said on many of our programs, all these doctrines and acrobatics, political acrobatics, I mean, would not be necessary if U.S. would have done what they had to do between 1952 and 57. They had Russians at their mercy. They could overrun Russia, destroy Russia, do anything unpunished before 1957. They failed.
They were relative. The U.S. was relatively invulnerable to nuclear attack. I mean, the Russians basically only had bombers, intercontinental, the Tu-4, I believe it was, which
But
could
they
only
couldn't
reach
fly. They couldn't fly through over Canada.
they could only go reach the U.S. by one-way missions and at high altitude, which the U.S. was fully prepared for with its Nike Hercules system, which basically had nuclear-tipped warheads. You know, you fire one of those into a formation of Russian bombers, and they're gone with a nuclear detonation. So
Absolutely.
they essentially, you know, until the Soviet Union
Agreed.
developed the ICBM and test fired it, they said, okay, now we can hit you. At least in principle, we can hit you with something. So that had in certain respects a restraining effect on U.S. freedom of action. But after 1957, yeah, they didn't have that absolute invulnerability to nuclear attack. But in
Agreed.
any case, this is why even into the 21st century, Putin is relying on the one thing that Russia believes gives it leverage, gives it prestige, gives it the opportunity to force the West to react to its initiatives. And so he's going back to the nuclear forces. Whether or not they are effective is an open question. But they certainly do know, so the Russians certainly do know that if they were to attempt a nuclear attack, they would be greeted with a massive nuclear counter response on the part of the combined nuclear forces of the United States and NATO. I mean, those forces are larger than the Russian nuclear arsenal. And again, we do not know uh, just how well maintained are those nuclear forces. Yeah, it may well be that they are firing a bunch of blanks, so that we
Or they,
don't know that.
or they will explode in their silos and
Yeah,
won't
they
even
could.
get up.
So
Listen, we covered a lot of ground today, but
yes,
there
we
is
did.
more ground that we haven't covered today, and we have to do it on Tuesday. And hope Ivan and Jonathan, you will be joining
Oh,
us
we will be.
Tuesday, same time, same place. In the meantime, thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Bye.
Okay,
Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.
thank you.